Yeah, 1894. Basically, what ended up happening was the U.S. Army decided, well, we're going to arrest the governor of the Pueblo people because a couple of teenage boys from the tribe got drunk and basically caused some stuff, and they were blaming it on the governor, like, oh, you gave them alcohol instead of teenage boys being teenage boys.
Right.
So they attempted to arrest him while I was there, and basically she ended up literally grabbing them and throwing them out. And she was a big woman. She was 6 foot tall, very strong. It's kind of weird going back to the newspaper articles because it's good that they're using, she, her. It's good that they're talking about, like, not, really criticizing looks, but it's then winds up becoming this kind of exotic fetishizing her, which then is like, well, that's gross.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like
come and see the bearded lady.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things. Like it's just like this real exotic kind of flavor, like kind of like what a lot of people will do with Asian women. So I mean, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, that's neat, but that's also really gross. Like how they're describing her too. So it's like, okay.
But when you were talking about her being, I guess, very popular in Washington circles, that was sort of my first question: is like as a person or as like a sideshow?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's one of the things where it's kind of it kind of goes off on it, where it's just like I'm not 100% sure. And that's one of the things, like, I'm not sure if it's like, oh, it's something, she's someone different, or is it actually that, I don't know. Like I said, there's just a whole bunch of different things where it just kind of gets kind of muddied and, and you're just trying to go with what the newspapers say at the time. So it's kind of hard to really tell what was going on.
Right.
Well, it I guess just serves to point out how inaccurate these data recording devices are and how much data is not collected. But it's still fascinating to know that this story, sort of captured the public's attention, that people were noticing and being exposed to these ideas as far back as, the 1890s.
Exactly. And there's some interesting history before Jim Crow really came into effect. And there's, and just like there used to be other minorities that used to have positions of power before the turn of into the 20th century, then a lot of that power was lost.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a pretty breathtaking story. What do we have? You were talking about a couple of newspaper articles. I mean, how has any of this been saved or recorded?
I mean, that's kind of the thing, is like it winds up being most of the stuff that actually is there is actually from her tribe, is basically where most of the data that I was able to find on it. A few newspaper articles that were written, but it's then hard to be able to get them because not all of them have been digitized to actually be where I can look.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of different things where it's just I want more, but I can't find more.
Yeah.
So it's kind of frustrating where it's just like I'm really interested in this person, but I'm not 100% sure, like, how am I going to find more information?
I am fascinated by the process of digging up information about somebody who is from the past. I remember I was doing a research project for a musical that I was writing years and years and years ago about Christopher Milne, the son of A.A. Milne, who wrote the Winnie the Pooh books. And somehow it started out with, hey, this guy was a real person. Christopher Robin was real. That's cool. Let's look more about this. To like 2 years later, in the middle of nowhere in the fields of like rural England, in this gigantic windowless building, like with this box of his letters to people I was like, how did I get here? What is happening? It's so much fun. And it's really, there is that really visceral connection to this other person and this keen understanding that I will know them only to a point, and then they just disappear. They turn into mist and yeah. I'm super curious. How did you? I guess I'm curious about your process. How did you start finding these people? Like, how did you come across this one person who is spoken of in one or two
it's one of those things where it winds up being. I have family that live up in Oklahoma, and since there is such a large Native population, they have some really great resources on just information on just like different tribes and different things. So I kind of went in there just kind of looking like, can I find anybody on as far as non-binary gender of some kind, and just kind of looking, and it's like, ooh, I found something. Let me try to get as much as I can. And unfortunately, like I said, it just kind of stopped. And I'm sure that there are probably people that have been able to find more. And, and I'm, like I said, there's just a whole, and I'm, like I said, this is mostly just, I'm an amateur researcher. That's it.
Sure.
So it's not like,
No, I get that it's a passion project,
Yeah,
but I still find it fascinating. And it makes me wonder about, I guess, sort of our future, about when people will be looking back at the counterexamples or whatever from our time. And the reality is there will certainly be more data available. Pending some giant Skynet type apocalypse that, destroys all of our computer systems. I imagine there to be a lot more opportunity, a lot greater chance for people to be seen and for people to at least retroactively be acknowledged. But I also recognize that we already exist in this world that is so flooded with misinformation. It's less about the information that we're losing and more about all of the noise that's kind of overtaking it.
That's always kind of the thing that you don't really know, because there's certain things that get like, oh, well, because there are several different things where I'm like getting like, just trying to find like multiple sources just to say like, okay, this is what happened, or at least as best as I can figure it happened.
Sure.
Because there's certain things where it's just like, and then it's also like, okay, I think, some of these newspapers are probably sensationalizing some things. And it's like, well, that doesn't seem right either. That seems a little out there.
Right.
So like I said, I'm always curious, like, what am I missing? Is there something I'm missing? Because I think it'd be interesting just to be able to find out, but unfortunately.
Well, and I'm such a humanist, sometimes not as skeptically as I perhaps should be. My heart is just so ready to be given over to these ideas about human progress and about the things that we can achieve, that I would like to believe that we are, if by nothing else, by simply existing in a day and age where there's better record keeping, creating a foundation for generations ahead of us to have better examples, to be able to listen to podcasts with folks that are non-binary or trans or these different kinds of things. And I'm excited to be a part of that world, but I have to admit there's always a part of me that's nervous, that, looks at what's going on in the news and looks at these different things and can feel very defeated.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's kind of one of those things like things get kind of crazy. You don't really know, like, there's just certain things that will just occur and you don't really know exactly what's going to happen, like how are things going to shift. It's just wild. It's a wild ride.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend yesterday. I was like, I feel so dumb for saying this, but I feel like we're so close, right? Like in 30 years, like when I'm 50 something, like then it'll be fine, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's how that works.
Well, if nothing else, I have to say that, as a therapist, when I work with teenagers, I'm always really excited and relieved to see that while they are teenagers and they have dumb teenage ideas, as teenagers have for millennia, that they so often know the words that, V, you and I have talked over and over and over again on this show about how much our lives would have been different if somebody had just sat us down with like a modern urban dictionary and give us some vocabulary. And it's exciting for me to see that change.
Oh, definitely.
Definitely. That's the thing I'm just thinking back is like, I was on the early internet and I was like just finding this stuff, like what little I could find on like my little dial-up modem. It was just like, okay, here we go. The amount of information that's been coming out where I'm just like, okay, this is great. Just to get to, I think I think things would have been a lot different for me if I had access to the information. I think, it's just kind of one of those things where, but that's what happens is like you don't get all of that information. But now at least kids are being able to kind of explore it, or at least just hear about it, where they at least know like, oh, those people exist. It's like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then they go do whatever.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm a little embarrassed now to remember that, I was using dial-up internet to search bikini.com because it wasn't blocked by my parents' search filter. So
Oh my goodness.
that's a true story that now I guess lives on the internet forever. But let's continue, I guess.
Oh, yeah.